TKO Boxing with Sherry Abbasi, and this evening I'm joined by Mr. Brian Campbell of Morning Kombat. Brian, like I said, thank you so much for jumping on today and giving me some of your time this evening in the UK. I suppose it's not evening there yet, but how are you, bro? How are you doing?
Oh, fired up as always, Sherry. Thank you for the kind welcome. I'm good, man. It's been a heck of a year for the box, and I'm just happy to have had played a hand in it. We'll see what the future brings.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about, Brian. So, of course, with things to do with Showtime on the back burner, we've got things to talk about there. But like you said, it's been a hell of a year for boxing. It really has. A landmark year, I'd say, in the last sort of 5 to 10 years at least. We've had big fight after big fight, and I'd say 90% of them actually delivered in terms of we've had, even if it hasn't been a sort of fight of the year contender, we've had one fighter pull out a performance that's just unreal. Or even if both guys have really given 100%, we've had some great fights. I think, like yourself, you've been involved in a fair few big fights on the Showtime side of things. But today, Brian, I was hoping to just start a bit further back. This is more about you. Similar to your colleague, your friend Luke Thomas, I spoke to him last week. I wanted to sort of just delve into your personal sort of history with boxing and sort of your earliest memories of the sport and what sort of led you to following this path in it as a career.
Yeah, it's certain key exposures and decisions along the way make it not surprising that I ended up here. Meaning that, I grew up in the born in 1978, right into the rush of the Rocky movies and what that did to establishing boxing fans, and that really coincided with a couple of things at once. Me getting an illustrious cable box when I was 5 years old that suddenly had access to MTV and the Rock and Wrestling connection they had going on with WWF at the time there, and Hulk Hogan. Then you got Hulk Hogan showing up on the A-Team. Then you got, oh, wait, that guy's in the Rocky movie too. And oh, yeah, by the way, I think Hagler versus Hearns was on ESPN every single day after school in the 80s too. There's a bunch of things that sort of come together. My dad, never a sports fan, but there were a few times along the way that the big fight itch got to him. A pay-per-view party we had at our house for Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler in 1987. These are like sort of the memories you don't forget. My Mike Tyson coming out of jail in the 90s, just as my dad agreed to purchase the illegal cable box that suddenly gave us free pay-per-view, and we're watching UFC early pay-per-views, all the Mike Tysons. And I even have a grandfather on my mom's side who watched no sports at all except for boxing. So you put together all of these memories, and it was always a factor in my life. I watched the pay-per-views through the squiggly lines in the 90s just to listen in, the same squiggly lines that we're like, is that a boob? I think that might be a boob right there. But I wasn't, a day-to-day hardcore fan, always a big picture pay-per-view heavyweight division type fan, until I sort of put the gloves on with some friends in my 20s and started training and sparring, and all of that comes together with the rise of YouTube, and you can purchase, entire catalogs of certain fighters and watch their entire careers in one. And I'm spending hundreds of dollars on DVDs in the mid 2000s while everybody else is out on Saturday nights. I'm watching every fight, and before you know it, you're addicted, man. And any idea of this being a casual relationship moving forward was not going to happen. And it coincides with me achieving a career dream in my late 20s when I finally hooked on at ESPN. And that was a long 12-year journey there of really just trying to prove that, yeah, I'm the fight guy, and there is something here. There is a job path here. There's something. The amount of twists and turns to get to where I am today would need to fill a script for a movie. But it always was there. It always came back up, even though if I was more of an NBA fan at times, there was something about the boxing that equally felt historic and regal and over the top and ridiculous, that, my pro wrestling brain as a child could understand that the theatrical connection, the way that boxing movies tend to be the best sports movies, all that mattered to create me, which is a hopelessly addicted, shameless fan of this incredible and absurd sport.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Touching on what you said about sort of the WWF side of things and growing up with that, I mean, the era that you were talking about, the Hulk Hogan's, the Iron Sheiks, and all these type of larger than life characters, shall we say. and the crossover appeal that someone like Hulk Hogan had, Thunder Lips in Rocky 3. That's an iconic role, even though it was only in there for a few minutes, but people remember that. How important is it that, like in boxing, we need characters? For example,
100%.
The conversations I've had with a few people in recent weeks is fighters don't sell themselves enough, even though they have every tool to do so now. Social media is that's a tool that didn't exist back then, but fighters were somehow larger than life then, but not now. How is that a thing when we've got everything there? How are fighters not able to sort of grasp that concept? Some do, but nowhere near enough.
Some do. It's also just the disorganization in general of the sport, not just from a broadcasting promotional standpoint, but in every aspect. Look, boxing could not do more things to make it harder to get into it, yet it also resurfaces, once or twice a year and is the biggest headline, the biggest must-see event of the entire year, maybe in sports separate from the Super Bowl when you get a pay-per-view that big. So it's not maybe a lack of understanding of how to market. It's just there's so much competition these days. It's all about, it was pay-per-view for a while. Now it's streaming. Now it's back to pay-per-view in terms of what's hot and how people get behind. Boxing does a lot of bad things to prevent its own growth and marketing. But at the end of the day, it is the lust and thirst for the big fight that still provides the sort of foundation of why I get excited as a fan and journalist for my job in the big fight. And the reason why I think pro wrestling is important to understand it from this standpoint is we all come to combat sports for different reasons. I say this a lot in MMA, where I don't hide that, I've covered the sport for over a decade and I try to bring some voice to the proceedings, but I'm not an MMA purist, even though I was watching the early UFC pay-per-views, like I said, with my dad on the illegal cable box. Some people go to that, covering that sport because they love the skill and the X's and O's and the human chess and all that stuff. And that's great. I come to this sport and stay in this sport and chose this as a career path with boxing and MMA because the lust and lure of a big fight is just something that still to this day transcends everything. It's like this ridiculous broken sport that everyone thinks is corrupt or too violent or all these other things, yet they will drop everything once a year for that really big fight you can't miss. It's been on the horizon. And that's because the storyline of selling storylines, selling an appeal, making you care. Because look, people could fight every single week and it could be the two best guys in the world or the two worst. But what's going to define whether you care enough to tune in ultimately is how it's sold. It's sold over the top in pro wrestling. It's sold over the top in movies, right? But yet it's about like nothing really. I mean, look, think about how much in wartime. Think about back decades ago when boxing was the sport of kings, when it was up there with baseball and horse racing as sort of the big power sports that the NFL and soccer takes up today in an American sense. NBA, obviously, too, college football. Back then, though, it was like they even stopped wars to tune into the radio and cheer for their guy. I mean, when, Max Schmeling and Joe Louis fought the second time, it was as if World War II was in the balance. You know what I'm saying? There's something to the idea. There's an elite romanticism to the idea of not just fighting in general, but playing up the fanfare of why a fight matters. And maybe it's the big moments like Hogan versus Andre, WrestleMania 3, where my dad had half the town over our house for a big party, because the buildup to telling that story of this fake fight was just so compelling that people got hooked in, which is not different. The same calendar year from the storyline that got me as a fan all fired up for Sugar Ray Leonard coming out of retirement, moving up in weight, defying the doctor's orders of the eye injury he had, that he may go blind one day, and takes on the best middleweight of all time and wins a disputed decision. This stuff is in my DNA. That sometimes in life, everything, you're at your high school growing up, but there's a big ass fight that breaks out. And guess what? Everything stops in that moment. Everyone stops what they're doing and looks. When it's done right, meaning fight promotion at the highest level, it's an art form. And I think there's sometimes an overall laziness with sort of, well, these fights sell themselves, or every fight has to be this big Mayweather Pacquiao thing where we built it for a decade. No, there's different fun, creative ways to do it. Maybe it's not done these days as aggressively as it should be, but that's still the secret sauce and the drug that hooks me all these years later. I can appreciate the sporting element of it. I can appreciate the craft of it. I can appreciate the courage of it, but it's the spectacle. It's that lust for something huge that creates what I call the best moment of sports. Somebody said this to me once on my way to the first Las Vegas fight I ever covered, Floyd Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez, 2013, one of the biggest selling pay-per-views in history. It was sort of the idea that like nothing, I don't know, like there was a level of fanfare there for that was like I've never seen before. Just, that wasn't even a great fight, but there's just something about that, the lust for that moment, for that big attraction at the end of the line, that's why I'm still here, all these years later, loving and living this. It's crazy. It breaks your heart, it breaks your wallet, but every once in a while we all press pause and go, you know what, there's something going on here, and I still love that.
Absolutely. And I think a few points that you touched on there, like the art of, again, goes back to WWE, just an example, the art of selling in the ring and cutting a promo, for example. What made some of the greatest, WWE events ever were the promos, The Rock and Stone Cold, these type of characters again. And whenever I think of boxing in recent years, it's a shame that he's not as active right now, but someone like Keith Thurman, he's mastered that. That guy can talk on the mic to even just a journalist with 25 subscribers on YouTube. He'll give you a 15-minute promo. He will go out of his way. And again, I don't know what sort of pay-per-view buys maybe he's done with his fights, but I mean, he has always had that character and that type of thing. But
Yes.
He's the first guy that springs to mind in recent years who understood that. And I think, someone like, for example, fighter of the year is probably going to be either Terence Crawford or Inoue. Obviously, there's a language barrier with Inoue, so we can't really count him in that. But Terence Crawford's always been a pretty quiet guy, doesn't say a lot, didn't really go out his way to sell his fights. But he's the greatest fighter on the planet. But someone like Keith Thurman always has stuck with me, and I've been a fan of him because of the art of selling selling a fight,
Sure.
promo. And even then, he was a unified champion and whatnot. So there's no denying he's a great fighter. But it was also the fact that he could sell and talk the way he did. And then touching on, like you said, these memories that you've got throughout your life that always bring you back, and that moment. And I think you said yourself, people will always stop. The world will stop when there's a big fight going on. Max Kellerman said a few years ago, you might even remember this. He said it on a ESPN show once. He was saying, there's 4 street corners. You've got basketball on one, baseball on one, NFL on one, and there's a fight breaking out on the 4th. He goes, all the attention will go to the 4th because as human beings, we have an innate desire for conflict or some sort of conflict resolution, so we say, how we want to put it. We will then flock to watch that. And like you said, Canelo versus Mayweather, that build up for that event, even though it didn't end up being a great fight, ended up being a pretty one-sided affair. That moment before when the bell rings or just before the bell, that build up.
That's it. The 10 minutes before, when the fighters are walking to the ring and the announcements begin, the final 10 minutes before the opening bell has long been said, even more than the countdown of the Kentucky Derby and the quick race and the money that's at stake, is the most exciting moment in sports. And I didn't realize that until Mayweather Canelo, that it is. There's nothing like being in the building and a great seat. And UFC, by the way, does such an incredible in-arena production that I'll put them on this level too. But it's weird. We bring up Mayweather fights because those are the biggest ones we've seen in the last couple of decades. And a lot of those were one-sided masterpieces. Yet what do I remember most? The build to get there, right? And that whole idea of the anticipation, and that fight had that too. But yeah, man, and it's a people that can, I mean, look, I've always realized from the beginning that this is salesmanship. This is entertainment. This is like getting people to drop everything and believe that for one night that it's worth to pay this exorbitant price to get this fight into your living room. Like, there's a lot of those elements in it. But I think that what makes the Max Kellerman comment, which I think he started it by saying, boxing is really everybody's favorite sport at the end of the day. Meaning that, if the sport stopped having the kind of problems it has through disruption that get in the way of its growth, it probably would become everyone's favorite sport if it was actually run and organized and centrally governed. Because I think personally, because it's first and foremost, it's such a mirror of life, but I think you can get out of it whatever you're looking for. If you're lusting for violence and conflict, you can get it. If you're looking for resolution, you can get it. If you're looking for inspiration and sort of like I said, a mirror image of the struggle of life, you can get it. Yet it's crazy that this singular sport with basic rules has stayed the same for 100-something years. And isn't it also weird that it's the only sport that ages in reverse? Meaning, when we talk about the NBA, it's like, hey, George Mikan was probably great, but he ain't guarding Shaq in the post 50 years later. Boxing's the only sport where we're like, you know what? Sugar Ray Robinson would be kicking some ass up and down the divisions today. It's just weird how inverted that is, where the sport can still be the number one sport or the number one entertainment option on a Saturday night because it's just so built well through storytelling and conflict. Yet at the same time, it's the most ridiculous niche sport that you're like, how is it even still around? How is it even still in power? It's such a backwards structure, but it's just so classic. You know, it's just, I mean, it's like I said, it's conflict resolution. We deal with that in our neighborhood, in our schools, in our work. It is what it is. You just put on gloves and you get after it.
Absolutely. And I think, like we said, the few seconds before the bell goes and that the crowd roar and everything just before the bell goes, if you could bottle that up, that energy in the arena, the stadium, wherever you are, that I don't think you can put that into words. And I actually had my first experience this year. I came out to America, to Las Vegas for Spence Crawford. I said, when that fight gets made, no matter what happens, no matter what my financial state is, I've got to risk it all and go.
Yes.
So I made it. I was there. You guys were in the arena as well, of course. And that moment before the bell went, I was like, this is 7, 8, 5, 10, 15, however long. This is such a historically significant fight. The build up for this, granted, the fight was 5 years in the making, shall we say, from when Crawford moved up in 2018. 5 years too long, but also maybe came at the right time in a lot of ways because of the anticipation of it. But what a moment, what a night, what a performance.
There's like the pageantry, the expectation, the drama. That's before the fight even starts. I've had fight weeks where it doesn't, like I said, Mayweather Canelo, it doesn't even matter that the fight failed to live up on. I mean, that fight failed to live up on every single expectation outside of seeing a dazzling, amazing performance from a smaller, older man, who relied on guile and experience. It wasn't exciting. There was a corrupt scorecard and like everything about it sucked. But I wonder if the reason why boxing still retains such a big event feel across like that, like as much as people look at it as the crazy neighbor on their sports street, they still have the respect that when the sport shows up, they know there's a chance it could deliver something unique. Like we talked about those final 10 minutes where you're just, whether you're in the arena or you're watching at home, you're just going crazy, nervous, you're shaking. And it's like I said, it doesn't matter if you're in it for gambling, entertainment, the sport of it, the inspiration of it. I wonder if the broken structure in some ways makes these events feel so much more and larger than life than even they actually are. And what I mean by that is if you're an MMA fan, the UFC has built its success and its structure on the idea of having so much control over the fighters that they basically can make every fight, any fight they want every month for the most part, year after year. So there's never a big anticipation years in advance. I guess you could say in team sports like the NFL, the NBA, maybe there's this 3, 4, 5 years in the making type of feel. If you say, well, what if these two guys ever meet in the finals? We never got Kobe versus LeBron in the finals, but it's really not the same equivalent to a fight, especially a big fight. I mean, think of what I mentioned there, Leonard versus Hagler, a fight that was talked about for years, looked like it was never going to happen. And then out of nowhere, you're like, I think this thing might happen. And it's even crazier than ever. We get those stories all the time in boxing. And as much as we hate waiting 5+ years for both Spence Crawford or Mayweather Pacquiao, and as much as those sort of outsized expectations that come from waiting, a lot of times it's impossible to live up to. Think of how wild that is. These fight cards aren't known for loaded undercards. Sometimes you buy a UFC pay-per-view, you're buying it because you have love for 7 different fights on there, not one. Boxing is about one fight, one narrative, 2 fighters, and this long, grand road of corruption and missteps to get to that point. I mean, it's even crazy if you really think about it, Mayweather Pacquiao, that we ever actually got it. For how many pitfalls there were, the drug issues, Pacquiao getting knocked cold by Marquez, then getting upset by Tim Bradley the fight before that, like all these things that should have gotten in the way, their age. And yet when they finally made that, even though the guys were 38 and 36 respectively in terms of age, we all lined up like this is the biggest sporting event in all of our lifetime. And in the moment, it felt like it. It really did, which is why when people say, hey, I love the pay-per-view buys for Mayweather McGregor or Mayweather Pacquiao or Mayweather Canelo. Like these are huge fights, but it's never going to hold the place that like Ali Frazier 1 had. And I think that's true. I don't think there's been a cultural connection to boxing. I mean, Manny Pacquiao came close to some degree, but really, since Ali, that was probably the last time there was that level of like cultural connection. But a fight can change the world. And that's crazy, right? That's crazy. But I mean, it's so stupid and it's such a broken sport. Yet, man, I tell you, man, nothing hits the highest note. And that's what I love and respect about, let me say, John Anik, for example, the voice of the UFC, but a boxing fan, a former radio host who basically still will say today on camera, I cover the UFC. I love it. There's nothing like a UFC big fight. The only thing better is a really big boxing fight that delivers. And I think that still holds true. And maybe it's the broken structure, but it's always about those two guys. What would happen if they finally meet? And then when they do, there's so much anticipation baked into that.
That comment that you just made there about the cultural sort of connection back then and sort of the disconnect maybe now, what would you sort of pinpoint the reason for that being?
I think there's I understand why I can only speak from the US standpoint because that's where I'm from. But like, I came up as a kid in the 80s at the end of boxing's sort of royalty phase. I mean, where it was still considered a major sport because the Ali era had just ended when I was a couple of years old, tying into the Sugar Ray Leonard Four Kings era where boxing's all over mainstream TV. And then, we've seen over the last 20 years as a sport commercially go in a really rough direction. And I just think overall in the States, maybe it's pointed at the idea that there's just too many sporting options nowadays, that the same kids that grew up in the inner city at that same boxing gym on the street corner, they ended up on a football field and now they're playing in the NFL. It's as simple as that. I think you tie in the idea that all of the great heroes that so many people my age came up watching, they're all pretty brutal and battered post-career from daring to be so great, from having careers like Ali and the Four Kings had, where you're constantly trying to prove yourself and you'll fight anybody at any time. And the financial structures were different, but fights back then, they delivered the fights that mattered more. They were accessible for the most part on regular TV, especially in the 80s and that big boom there with not just cable and HBO, but boxing being on actually ABC, Wide World of Sports, regular TV and all the networks at that point. It held a different place back then. There was a royalty to it. It was the idea of literally like that whole baddest man on the planet tagline that we threw around from Mike Tyson into Fury versus Ngannou last weekend. It sort of mattered, and that has gotten diluted, of course, by boxing's own problems, by the fact that the sport's so expensive to watch. There's so much more competition in America for team sports, and on top of that, it's all about streaming and how you're going to access this. And when it's hard to access, it's hard for the sport to grow. It's hard for these fights to matter. But I also think there were certain times when we're talking about some of these glory year periods where it's wartime, where a fight can be, sports can play such an incredible role during wartime as being a gathering force, unifying people together. Think of war-torn countries during Olympics or World Cups in soccer, where it's like, this means more than sport. We haven't had that, especially in the US, in decades, where it's meant that much in terms of who wins and why. It's more about the Mayweather and De La Hoya eras where big money, big dollars, maybe we'll get a good fight about it. But yeah, boxing hasn't held that place in a while. And I think it's more, institutional over years and decades. There's not a boxing gym on every corner. The US amateur system is at this point is not in a great spot where there's this like feeling of, if I could just make it to the Olympics and be a star and follow Sugar Ray Leonard's lead and get commercial deals, like that's not a fruitful road. When you look at the, specifically in the US, the struggles the amateur boxing system has had, it just doesn't play the role in proper polite society that the sport once did. And that's never, as Larry Merchant would always say, boxing, you can't fix it, but you also can't kill it. The sport's going to always hold that place, but I don't know. While we've had the debate I'm about to regurgitate to you for decades on podcasts and all this kind of stuff, I don't know if there will ever be a golden period again. There probably will be. We look at the calendar year we had this year when we didn't think, all these fights could get made simultaneously. Everything's cyclical. There will be another golden period, I believe, in some form where boxing is extremely mainstream again. I just don't know how it happens. It may just be one superstar. It may, when you look at the impact that Tiger Woods had on golf for a decade and a half, when he's healthy and playing, there's just a different appetite for events. It's a different financial structure. Maybe there will be that crossover pay-per-view star on an almost McGregor Ali level that once again grips it. But I don't know if it'll ever have a boom period the right way again, where everyone is organized and involved and sharing the cut of the pie. I just don't think in a Wild West sport like boxing with so many cowboys in it, you can really ever get that. It would have to be dead and broken to almost disrepair, which is the story of the UFC. Why is the UFC where it is today? Because some really smart people who were bold with a lot of money said, let's pick up this broken sport that's not even, it's banned on TV, and let's build it up and give ourselves every advantage over the fighters. You know what I mean? I just don't see that happening. We've almost seen the opposite effect of that in the Al Heyman era, where through Floyd Mayweather and through PBC, in a lot of ways, we've seen for the first time how to treat fighters the right way, with respect, financially, all these things that sort of in the past, you hear the stories of them getting beaten up and used by promoters. It's almost the opposite of that. But I hope like hell in my lifetime, we will truly see another golden era of boxing, where it is like not just must see for the once or twice a year that Mayweather fights, or whoever that next star is, Canelo, Shakur Stevenson, Tank Davis, whoever it's going to be, but truly where people are like, there's connective tissue. I need to watch what's going on in 5 or 6 divisions at once. I want to get back to that point. I don't know how yet, but it could be the right fighter at the right time. It could be the right network with the right promoter at the right time. Something's going to happen eventually to have the type of romanticized runs we talk about. I mean, the last great run in boxing, although there were high points in the Mayweather, De La Hoya, Roy Jones eras, the last great run was the 90s, when that heavyweight division was just the most deep it's ever been. And there was just so much to talk about and want to see. We got to get back. We got to get back to that point. We got to get it back to royalty again. You can't control it, but I think there are steps boxing can make to hopefully make it easier for that to happen.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me just sort of adding on to what you just said there about, you mentioned the US side of things, I'd like to just sort of counter and sort of add the UK perspective. I think for us now, we had our biggest ever boxing boom between 2013 and 2021. I believe 2021 is when our British boxing boom ended, when Eddie Hearn left Sky Sports and went with DAZN, full steam ahead for the global approach.
Yeah.
We had 2014, Carl Froch, George Groves, Wembley Stadium, 80,000 fans, spectacle, unreal. And that sort of whet the appetite for what boxing can be again in this country. We had Anthony Joshua in 2012 winning an Olympic gold medal, allowing people to get behind someone, a golden boy of sorts, a good character, someone who then went on to become media trained, really good style in the ring, knocking people out and all these, giving us what we want as a heavyweight. Then winning a world title. Tyson Fury beats Klitschko. Yes, he had his problems, but we had two reigning heavyweight champions, and then further down the line, they're both holding all the belts in the division. Unfortunately, we didn't get the fight at that time. But the point is, Anthony Joshua, through his success and the media side of things, the sponsorships, the TV appearances, the designer labels getting behind him, he became our biggest ever superstar up until now. And in my head, I can't imagine how we're going to recreate that moving forward, because it looks like it's so fragmented in the UK now. And there's not enough. There are 3 main promoters, but there's not enough big stars for the 3 promoters to share, if that makes sense. And that's back to the sport, definitely. But Anthony Joshua, 2017 and 2018, 4 stadium fights, 80 to 90,000 people each time. Then in 2021, after COVID, another stadium fight against Usyk at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 65 to 70,000. These things are unheard of, and we're probably not going to get them again in the UK. Yes, Tyson Fury had 2 last year. I appreciate that. But again, Joshua took it to a different level, and that then trickled down to the lower weight classes. And through that era, we had 12 world champions in 2015, 12 world champions from the UK, which is only this small. But, these sort of after effects and knock-on effects that one big superstar can have, that's
a great point. And to have them come through the amateur system, that's the key. That's the hook right there, right? It really, what I was going to say when you started that and you really hit a lot of the key high points is, it really was because of 2012 and Anthony Joshua in so many ways. Now, you can't tell that story without mentioning Eddie Hearn, so I'm glad you did that, because there was a successful plan he put into place to make it feel more like an elegant night out, really make it feel fun, energetic, hard-hitting, well-matched cards. You needed the right money, man. You needed the right timing. We could not have come off a worse era, the Klitschko heavyweight era for heavyweight boxing, which is the gateway drug to the casuals. Not the Klitschko's fault, but what a dead era, the stretch between Lennox Lewis's retirement in 2004 and that 2015 upset of Fury over Klitschko. You had a Renaissance heavyweight era with larger than life super heavyweights who all, for the most part, wanted to fight each other. Yeah, we didn't get all the matchups yet that we want, but there was that sweet spot that you're talking about where AJ would come out in a soccer stadium in front of 90,000 like he was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson at WrestleMania. And in the whole key to all of that era working is not just the star power of AJ and the connection to the Olympic team, which matters, because when you watch somebody grow from a boy to a man on your television, you become invested in that journey. It's the pricing. It's the pricing of pay-per-views on almost half the price of the US. It's making this type of entertainment affordable, where the US boxing model, unfortunately, in order for boxing to hold the place that it does hold, has to beat down the hardcore fan. The one who's already responsible financially with keeping the sport afloat has to just beat them down and make them, subscribe to every streaming network, which then has pay-per-view options on top of that, which really just makes it. I know everyone gets into illegal streaming if you're a hardcore fan and you figure out a way to subset your addiction. But the whole point is, if you want to be a boxing fan in the States, boy, do they make it hard and you have to go out of your way. That boom you had in the UK, it needed a few key parts, but it's possible. So maybe it really is that one homegrown star with that story. The last time maybe we've had that in the States was an Oscar De La Hoya, who went from, 1992 gold medal, mom dying of cancer, winning it, to becoming, a star as a pro from day one. He also, by the way, was great and always matched himself tough and doesn't get maybe the credit he deserves all the time as being a badass for that reason. But maybe it is that one. I mean, what's going to be that next Tiger Woods of boxing? Will he come from the States? It doesn't necessarily need to. Look at that Manny Pacquiao era. For when he hit the highest points of his fandom, that's one of the most unlikely scenarios. But it's crazy because it's not just the one star. In American boxing, we had Mayweather on top when the sport was struggling the most, yet he was still able to sort of make the biggest paydays. But you got to go back to the 80s and the Four Kings. You need a bunch of stars, but you need them to not just want to, but need to fight each other multiple times, need to prove to everybody, no matter the money at stake or anything of that they are the best. The best thing I can say for boxing's future, and I particularly aim at the US boxing's future, is that this new generation of young superstars right now, from Ryan Garcia to Shakur Stevenson to Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, add anybody else into that mix around those weight classes that you like. Tank Davis, I hope I didn't forget to say him. He's the face of it in a lot of ways. These young American guys want the smoke now. They don't necessarily want or need to enter the 5-year plan of building toward a big fight. Or, hey, I got to kind of wait till my TV deal's up. I mean, look what Ryan Garcia, the coup he did in the U.S. to get DAZN to team up with Showtime on pay-per-view and essentially take the back seat of the relationship. These young guys, and the reason why I say American is because in the other countries, I don't see this reluctance. In the other countries, whether we're talking more of the Russian-based countries or, even in the UK, guys, they want the smoke now. They want, they climb the ladder. They want to prove to everybody now how great they can be and take on the big chances. That needs to be a healthy sort of spirit in the background foundationally that can fuel a great era. And it's coming around again in US boxing. And while I'm not going to blame the PBC, Al Heyman, and Mayweather for creating an era that was more about business and money and protecting the fighter, because it was necessary, the ripple effect to some degree, I think you did get a lot of people who were like, well, look at what Floyd just did. I got to copy that model. Only they're not Floyd, right? So we don't need you to sit around and not fight, not take tough fights, because you're not Floyd at the end of the day. But I'm really encouraged by this calendar year, as we all are. But I think a lot of that is tied into guys saying, sorry, promoter, advisor, and network head, I run my career. I want it now. I hope that the Ryan Garcia Tank Davis blockbuster event that we saw earlier this year is just more of the beginning of this. And I give Jermell Charlo credit, even though, boy, did he fight awful against Canelo, for continuing that, right? Taking a tough fight, moving up in weight. We've seen it a few times this calendar year, but that spirit kind of needs to be there. We all hope we can get the next Sugar Ray Leonard to become the face of the sport, but how do you earn that? You really can only earn that in the ring, right? Leonard earned that by yeah, he was Olympic gold medal in sort of this baby face, but like he lost to Duran and ran it right back and won that. You know what I mean? He fought Tommy Hearns when it was one of the biggest fights at the moment in boxing history at the point that fight happened, and he rallied late to knock him out. Like, these guys sometimes nowadays, they want the big fight, but if they get into the big fight and it's not going their way, think Charlo versus Canelo, it's just sort of like, all right, I guess I still got more fights to take. Let me collect this check and get out of here. Kind of need a across the board, a return to that spirit. That's just like, I got to earn this the hard way. Forget about stardom. I've got to earn it the hard way in the ring by taking on big fights and performing.
I suppose the whole tagline of, dare to be great gets thrown around a lot, but daring to be great in the lead up to the fight is one thing. But like you said, it's once you get in the ring and those punches are getting thrown in and you're getting hurt and you're having to dig deep. It's about daring to be great then. And that's how you earn that place in the sport. And that's what makes you win, lose, or draw.
That's how you get the wins that
Yeah.
people are surprised about, that they're shocked about. Look, it's about building fight to fight like a narrative. Like we talked about selling fights earlier. Like look at pro wrestling can do it so great because they have the control over the outcomes, right? But it's about selling these stories of overcoming or improving or bouncing back. I'd love, but you need the organization, and maybe the current model, especially US based, is like promoter signs with network. They offer exclusive series under their roof. I hope we can get to a point again. And the last time we were maybe there in the American level was when you had HBO and Showtime, but 15 years ago, 10 years ago, HBO was still the number one. It was still the idea that if your fight was big enough in the States, you'd end up on HBO. Now that's sort of leveled out in recent years. HBO left. Showtime became the number one. Now they're gone. Top Rank had a nice renaissance at ESPN. DAZN has had high and low moments. But damn, if we could get even two major networks, not 3, 4, 5, right? Even just two where you could split it up like that. You just need big matchups and you need to package them together. But the old adage of, if boxing's a big pizza pie, boy, does everybody cut off their nose to spite their face and make sure that they can finish their one slice, you know what I mean, before anyone else gets a bite. What could change that? It's sometimes that you need hardship, or you just need people waking up and going, we can make this much money on our own, but could we make this much money together? I don't know.
That goes back to Garcia
cyclical.
and Tank, doesn't it? Garcia and Tank was a massive pie, and that they managed to share that, or split it in a way that made sense for everyone. So we need more of that, definitely. And sort of on the topic of Showtime's year this year, we've had massive fights. We've had Benavidez, Plant, Garcia, Tank, Spence Crawford, Jamel Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez, and now we're getting Andrade and Benavidez to sort of close out the year. What have been your thoughts? Obviously, you've been involved in a lot of these. You've been there. You've witnessed a lot of great performances and good fights. What has been your thoughts on the Showtime schedule this year? And sort of, I'm assuming naturally you'd be quite sad and sort of disappointed to see that Showtime is leaving the sport. What are your thoughts on them leaving the sport, and how proud are you of the year they've had? If this is indeed the end, which it is.
Yeah, and it looks to be the end at the end of this year, maybe 2 more cards. An incredible amount of pride for having just been able to join their great history. 37 years of calling boxing. I remember their first pay-per-view fight. I didn't watch it live, but it was Hagler versus Mugabe. I remember it was like a big deal. I watched Showtime pay-per-view through the Tyson post-jail era, young Trinidad on there. Remember Chavez Sr. having a huge run on there, and then through what's become the PBC era, the Mayweather era, we've had nothing but monster fights. You look at the biggest pay-per-views in history, how many of them were produced by Showtime pay-per-view? Like basically all of them, for the most part. So for me to join a series like ShowBox, which has such an incredible 22-year reputation, and I was able to be there at the end of it, I have so much pride because I've always respected the role that Showtime has played. At times they were the number 2 to HBO, but there were key times, really, I think beginning in 2013 when Mayweather and Heyman, jumped ship and won over there, that it shifted the balance of American television. Showtime has held, I think, since then, the number 1 spot. But at the same time, the way that this story ends right now is sad because it's not boxing or PBC or Showtime Boxing or Steven Espinosa's fault. It's the larger realities of companies and mergers. And I'm a Paramount employee with CBS Sports, and I watched this all break out. The year Showtime Boxing and PBC have had in 2023 is not, by accident. There was effort put in to sort of try to save all this, but the ending doesn't come through failure of them. The ending comes from numbers issues of the larger parent company and sort of looking at their own finances in the couple year aftermath of a merger and sort of figuring out the items that are most important to them. And I think I understand that to some degree, but it's been hard. I think the best thing I could say about it is watching the best of boxing this year. Again, not an accident. Al Heyman, Steven Espinosa and company really went for it. They put the sport first. They and what we saw was, I hope something that the momentum can be felt, especially in the PBC world, wherever they go in terms of a spinoff for their network coverage. I hope that's a momentum that will be sustained because it showed with arguably the best roster in boxing in terms from a promotional standpoint, what they were capable of. And it wasn't just the PBC, by the way. I mean, it was Stephen Fulton Jr. going over to ESPN for one fight and fighting in Inoue for all 4 belts. It was Devin Haney versus Lomachenko. I mean, we've had some incredibly just big, awesome, great fights. I give so much credit to the entire sport this calendar year for what they've done. But yeah, bittersweet doesn't begin to cover it for a legacy brand like that I mean, name the fight. Corrales Castillo won. I could name so many, the Vasquez versus Marquez 4 fights and the incredible trilogy within that. Showtime has from Steve Albert to Mauro Ranallo has been the voice right there, for American kids, boys to men like me who grew up on Jim Lampley just the same. Showtime was that standard. And it just, I never thought it'd be like this. When HBO went out, unfortunately, it kind of went out with a whimper, right? They didn't have the budget the last couple of years, and they tried their best to compete with the contracts they had, and it sort of just whimpered out. Showtime going out with a bang this year. I mean, look, the Benavidez Andrade pay-per-view November 25th it's a good ass, interesting fight at the highest level that's necessary in the larger division, which has so many stars right now. But does it stink? The way it's gone, it stinks. I mean, I've really appreciated the opportunities I've gotten there. I'll tell you what the responsibility I hold in the great jobs I've had. There's nothing better. There's no better drug in this entire game if you're lucky enough than to call a fight, to be a analyst or play-by-play, or I filled in for Jim Gray on the championship series doing in-ring interviews, which has a whole buzz and allure to it. There's nothing like, and I feel the responsibility properly, being able to lend your voice to the soundtrack of something that you care about, something that's bigger than you. When I get a chance to host a weigh-in, a press conference on fight week for a pay-per-view, let's say Tank versus Ryan, and those sizzle packages come out and my voice is on there. It's like I take that responsibility carefully. Importantly, when I'm calling a fight, I want to raise the attitude, the feeling, the level of joy that you could feel to a higher level, to that would equal what we're seeing in the ring. And to go out like this year, having covered this many huge events on the ground, on the front line, being the first guy on the camera when it turns on, that was something very special this year that I want to say I'll never forget. But I hope this is just to be the beginning, for the sport and for the PBC's transition, that we continue this. But this year was beyond special. Every big fight felt like we were trumping what we'd seen before, from the surprise of Benavidez Plant turning into this grudge match that people couldn't turn away from, and the Las Vegas crowd kind of anointing, Benavidez as maybe their new Canelo, the new guy with the Mexican heritage that they're ready to support, through the unique nature of the Tank versus Ryan Garcia, where the weigh-in that day, T-Mobile Arena outside, I've never seen that before, meaning there were so many thousands of people that they were so far back, curved around the arena, they had no chance of seeing the stage. They just wanted to be part of it because there's these two young superstars in their mid-20s with separate fan bases that are breakthrough sensations in their own marketing lane, and they brought it together. Then you've got the history of Spence Crawford that was just so unique, and we waited for it. The unique nature of Canelo versus Charlo, and Charlo moving up in weight and daring to be great. This year, if it's not the best year in my boxing career in terms of covering, I always say 2013, when there was real competition between HBO and Showtime, that was a major year. But you don't forget these years, because you begin to, when you're watching and following boxing close enough and working in, this very well. I mean, you got to deal with the sludge. You got to deal with the sins of this game. You got to deal with everyone saying, "Oh, that's the worst scorecard, man. Boxing, I never give them my money again. This always happens." You got to deal with all that BS. When you get a year where you no longer have to put the training wheels on your expectations, you no longer have to go, well, yeah, they'll probably screw one of the guys in this fight, and then we'll be talking about it ad nauseum. No, you're not even thinking about that. You're about the purity of, I just want to see what it looks like. I just want to see who wins. I just want to see who doubles down on their legacy by daring to be great in such an aggressive fashion. That inspires the living hell out of me. And I got a chance this year to lend my voice to it in some pretty big areas. I'll never forget that. Never.
Absolutely, Brian. And so on a personal level, I mean, you've been someone who obviously has worked very hard to get to where you are, and you've been very, very fortunate. And I'd use the word lucky, but I don't want to disrespect you, because you also create your own luck. I believe that as well. And you've had these opportunities this year and throughout your career. So congratulations to you on that. And obviously, RIP Showtime for the end of the year. But I mean, congratulations to you for that. So obviously that's massive. You're living the dream. You managed to do that this year. So big congratulations, and respect you as a boxing fan myself. Fingers crossed, like you said, the momentum carries through for PBC. Al Heyman is, look, this guy's a mastermind. He's a legend of the game in his own right. As private as he is and as behind the scenes as he is, you can't discredit this man. He's done some crazy things and been the orchestrator of some of the most, the most amazing things we've seen in boxing in the last 10 to 12, 14, 15 years even. So all credit to Al Heyman. And, I'm already seeing tweets from Andre Berto and other fighters affiliated to him saying, whatever the next move is, you just wait and see, because they've heard things. So hopefully it is something big, whatever it is. And we want to see PBC thrive and continue to see, give the sport that spotlight. Can I move on just to something else?
Sure.
Obviously, this weekend we saw what happened out in Riyadh, the opener of Riyadh season, Fury and Ngannou. I appreciate you've spoken about it a few times already on Morning Kombat, and you've probably had so many questions about it online. But what were your thoughts on what we saw? And I've already listened to the podcast, so I know. But have you had any more thoughts since then, or are you still thinking the same things? And what does it mean for Fury? What does it mean for Ngannou moving forward? And obviously the next steps for both.
It really turned into being such a pleasant surprise. Remember, this is just a couple of weeks removed from what I thought could have been the last of what these are. These crossover, started in the pandemic. It kind of started a couple of years before that with the Paul brothers getting into boxing. Then you saw Tyson and Roy Jones come back and do that huge pay-per-view. And since then, the whole idea of gimmick fights has almost sometimes trumped the need for huge fights until this year, luckily, where boxing came back, in terms of real big fights hitting so hard. But coming off of that last Misfits card, Dylan Dennis, Logan Paul, we have to apologize to Francis Ngannou, because the history of boxers trying to do this has produced big events. Think Mayweather McGregor has not produced success, consistent competition. And this was a fight on paper that just gave Ngannou zero advantages. At least Mayweather McGregor was like the younger, taller, bigger, maybe stronger puncher, and McGregor, like, okay, he's not going to have a big shot against Mayweather here, but Floyd's 40 and he's retired. And, there's a lot of elements. Ngannou was coming off a 2-year layoff. He's switching sports for the first time. It's a 10-round fight. The title's not even on the line. So if he did pull the impossible, so we were all prepared, and I did a live stream on Morning Kombat during it, and I almost feel bad for anyone that goes back and watches it, because I was in such shock as it was happening that it sounded dismissive, but it was I say that this was a special, kind of rare, like unique surprise, because it took everything we thought we knew about something, about this idea, about MMA fighters, which is almost becoming its own pandemic, meaning because there's the fighter pay disparity is so huge at the highest level in MMA compared to boxing. As soon as an MMA fighter gets real crossover stardom, becoming a UFC champion, the first thing they want to do is sell their soul to a boxer. The first thing. Kamaru Usman becomes pound for pound king. Suddenly he wants to fight Canelo, even though Usman's a wrestler and not known, for his hands as well. It's always like, it's almost like, okay, you're doing this, for your financial future, but you can tell everybody you think you have a chance. Nobody believes you have a chance. Mayweather McGregor was the perfect storm that'll never be repeated because of just the personalities and the perceived danger that you could sell to the public about what McGregor was doing. He was also on a run that you no longer could really understand how good he was, because he was doing things that you just didn't think were possible. And Ngannou had everything against him here. And he just captured this moment of like, anything's possible. Of like, is he really that unicorn whose original dream was to be a heavyweight boxing champion? So he, at 26 left working in the salt mines of Cameroon. And, we know his story, and got jailed in Spain for trespassing, and he's homeless, and he's living in his car in Paris, and he shows up at an MMA gym, and, he F's around and becomes UFC champion in like 8 years. And it's one of the craziest stories that already would have been fit for this incredible movie. And you add in everything that Francis had to go through to get out of his UFC deal, and he won his last fight with a broken, with a banged up knee that the doctor said he couldn't even walk on. I mean, there's so many elements to this. And then he gets accused of, fumbling the bag and all that goes with that. He's still got to fight the best heavyweight of this era, and one of the best heavyweights of all time, because who are you going to find a guy that's 6'9" that can mimic, the Fury's the worst mythical matchup guy in heavyweight history, because I said earlier that, like, as good as any fighter is today, even Floyd Mayweather, we always go, yeah, but what about him against Sugar Ray Robinson? What about him against Hearns and Leonard and, all this stuff? Fury's like the opposite of that. He's like, what about him and Ali? Yeah, what about it? What about him and Marciano? Yeah, what about it? What are they going to do with that dude who's 6'9" and quick as a middleweight and can lean on you and can also knock you out and can switch stances? And Ngannou, who, while already being sort of hailed as like maybe the biggest puncher in the history of combat sports, even though he had very subtle and key technique to his striking in the UFC, which was a big part of him being able to land these monster first-round knockout blows, he raised his game against Fury in such an unthinkable manner that I still sit here days removed that I just can't believe. Like, I'm waiting to find out that Tyson Fury was paid off, or that Tyson Fury had like I don't know, hepatitis or something, and he was barely able to hold it together. And he was just, because that just shouldn't have happened. That was a movie, right? That was literally the script to Rocky 1. And the fact that it couldn't have happened to a better guy in Francis, personally, I haven't followed his story. The fact that now the world is his oyster, like we're literally going, you know what? I think he could beat Wilder. I think he could beat AJ. We have no idea, by the way. That's 10 amazing, glorious rounds that could be the biggest aberration of all time, or this could be the Brock Lesnar of boxing, meaning the one just freak, the Deion Sanders, the Bo Jackson, where you're like, I can't really explain how those guys are playing two sports at the highest level. And obviously Bo, I think, was even, although Deion Sanders is probably the greatest of all time at his position as an NFL player, I mean, Bo was like top level in both sports at the same time, that are ways that are just like, I don't get it. Jim Thorpe type ways, right? This happened. And like, it happened 2 months before Fury versus Usyk was scheduled for like the most important heavyweight fight in like many decades. There's so many weird elements to this that I kind of just had to sit back and go, and yeah, there's debate about the scoring. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot that happened there in Riyadh. There's a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia being the new home, for better or worse, depending, I guess, on your stance, and sports washing and that whole idealism. Yet the show they put on with this as their sort of crown jewel was maybe something we haven't seen before in combat sports. There was so much to talk about one fight that I assumed we would deride the whole time afterwards, be like, this is the end of this BS. Nobody wants to see it anymore. Stop talking about, that we should make O'Malley versus Tank. Like, just stop this type of talk. No, Francis changed what we should believe on everything now. And the fact that we don't really know, was it one perfect night? Was it Tim Tebow winning that playoff game? Was it Jeremy Lin hitting a buzzer beater over Kobe and dropping 40 at the Garden, which was Jeremy Lin was it was possible that he could have a night like that, but that's not sustainable. Jorge Masvidal in 2019, that's not sustainable, although it was possible that he can come out there and knock people out and become a superstar. What Francis did is probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I don't think it was enough to win the fight. I'm a boxing purist. I understand how scoring has worked. He wasn't active enough to have this big argument that people are giving him, because with their eyes, they saw things they didn't believe. They saw him humble and disarm Fury. They saw him. I mean, Fury just could not get in a groove against a guy that he was supposed. I mean, we've all been there in some form in our life. Pick up basketball, something where you're just like, oh, I'm going to absolutely dominate this situation. And it was the complete opposite. Especially in boxing, how many times are the odds for a pay-per-view main event, minus 700 for the favorite? And you're just like, I mean, yeah, anything can happen, but no, this showed you that literally anything can happen. And yes, we have a special combat sports athlete in Francis. And I can't wait to find out, is that for real? Can he do it again? If they did a rematch tomorrow and Fury was in better shape, even though he's claiming he was in top shape, it didn't look like it. Does he handle that with ease? I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I care to find out. And I wasn't here a week ago. So what a pleasant surprise is really the best thing I could say.
Like you said, obviously, I can't speak for everyone, but since it's my channel and we're having an interview, I will speak for everyone, and I'll speak for all of combat sports. No one thought that was going to happen. No one thought he'd be able to do that. So I'm not going to say that they wrote him off completely, but it was just a matter of, oh, maybe if he lands a punch, but he's not going to land it. It's Tyson Fury. No, this, that, the other. And he went out there and he took the moment, and it sort of it reminds me of the film. Have you seen Brad Pitt, Troy?
I haven't seen it. I know the film you're talking about.
He plays Achilles in that film, and he says, I want my name to be remembered in history. I want, to echo my name for the rest of the time. And I'm going to take whatever moment comes. And there's a scene where he's talking to his soldiers and saying, we're going into battle now. He goes, there's glory, take it. Yeah. I think that was Ngannou's moment. He went out there, took the moment. He may not have got the official decision. He may not have even won the fight if you score it round by round, or whatever your opinion is, but he took that moment. And like you said, he does not need to go back to MMA now. He can be a star in boxing and make tens and 20s and
which was his
$1 million.
dream. Exactly. Which is so pure. That was literally the dream.
That's
that
the
was
beauty
like
of it. There you
where
go.
he's like, this is my home and there's nothing here for me. We've all been there to some degree, whether it's our hometown, our home country, whatever it is, where you're just sort of like, I can't live here. I can't fulfill my dreams here. Right. I need to go off. That's the dream that led him, like we said, to a story that's already too ridiculous for a movie script. And now you add this moment and think of like the pressure. I guess there wasn't pressure because we all predicted he's going to get knocked out, but the pressure knowing that Saudi Arabia is trying to make this big move. There was no limit, it seemed, on the money they were able to throw to make this event huge. I was embarrassed. I'm going to be honest with you. I was embarrassed the last couple of days of the fight when all that video went around, the fact that this was the most amount of like star power, not just combat sports legends, which they did that big picture with all the UFC and boxing legends. And you're like, yeah, I'm not sure. This feels like the NBA's like 50 greatest anniversary or something. Like I'm not sure we've ever seen this many stars together at once. And then you're like, oh, there's Eminem, Kanye, Vince McMahon. Like, it's just, I'm like, too bad they picked this fight to do that big event and to have, they put off like an Olympic opening ceremony with all this performance. And you're just like, man, too bad too bad they picked this fight. No, it was actually perfect. It was actually perfect. I mean, the cool thing is it's actually not about money for Francis and never has been. It's always been about principles, respect, the way that people are treated in the UFC. Most people are afraid to speak up. And he was just sort of like, no, I want to see change. I want to see positive outcomes. I would take my role in this, my responsibility in this seriously. And it became all about the money for the critics who didn't wait 2 months after he left the UFC without saying, oh, look, he hasn't gotten a new deal. He screwed up. Then he gets this ridiculous PFL deal. Then he gets the bag to fight Fury. And because it just so happens that now he's kind of the face of this new movement for Saudi Arabia, he's going to make, like, you're right, he doesn't actually have to fight in MMA anymore. Let's say he fought 4 more times in boxing over the next 2 years.
100 million plus?
Easily. If he does 4 Saudi Arabian events of different kind, what if he boxes Wilder? What if he boxes AJ? What if he was a rematch with Fury? What if he, like, I mean, you can name any type of, what if he boxes Jake Paul, which wouldn't happen, but I mean, like any kind of thing you can think of, because technically Francis is kind of in this bubble, but he's also kind of legit because he just did that to Fury. I mean, he's just going to make and it's not just like he's going to sit on the money. He's going to reinvest it back in his community, his family. I mean, I don't think we've seen an athlete worth cheering for on this pure level in a long time. That, like, just this pure of a human being. It's been wild to see all of these unthinkable situations, like him beating Cyril Gane with one leg in the first place, and they just keep happening. And it's like, if I mentioned when we did that preamble about why we love this sport so much, some of it is the inspirational side of it. Like, that's a monster side of it for me. I'm inspired to my core seeing Arturo Gatti get up from that body shot knockdown against Mickey Ward, right? Like, I'm inspired, like Corrales Castillo won, you better effing get inside. Like, I can tell myself that at the weight bench, trying to get myself to get to the next rep. What Ngannou did on Saturday literally made me recalibrate my own life and go, you know what? I'm already a big sort of self-help, encouraging type of guy. What Ngannou just did even shook me to the idea of, there's nothing practical about achieving your dreams. It's all impractical. So if you bring a mindset that's like, well, that's not practical, I could never do that, that could never happen to me. This actually goes back to like this core lesson about positive speech and about what you say to yourself, because Ngannou had to walk through mountains of criticism and doubt. And I mean, I remember thinking when I talked to his trainer, Eric Nixick, who was like, one of the seconds on his boxing team, was, him and Dewey Cooper as his lead MMA trainer. And, even Eric Nixick was like, well, I mean, the odds are against him. There's a big upheaval. I'm not saying that Eric didn't believe in him. His whole team seemed to be cohesive and together, but it was just this idea, even talking to him casually off camera, of like, all right, you're going to go out to this thing. We'll see what happens. You're going to make a lot of money, whatever. Francis fought in a way that was as if none of this was surprising to him. That and all the talk afterwards is him going, I think, by the way, they also kind of robbed me. I'm not even going to argue that with him, because like the amount of like the amount of chutzpah, is that the word I'm thinking of? The amount of like the balls on that guy to dream that big, that when he went in there and performed and had a chance, had a say that he may have won that it's all matter of fact. It's not like, oh, look at what I found. It was like, that was actually the plan all along, guys. Is there something, Sherry, that you can do with that information that could change your life? I kind of feel like it could. It really got me going, like, how much am I holding myself back
100%.
from everything I want to accomplish? Because this one man just refused to accept what life told him. That's powerful to me in a deep, 100%. Resounding way.
Absolutely. And like you said, regardless of what the result was, throw the result in the bin for a second. Let's look at what that means on a higher level, like you said. The message, the story of Ngannou, the beauty and essence of combat sport or boxing in particular, showing you that if you get a chance and you take it, anything is possible. And Ngannou's story is much bigger than boxing or UFC or MMA. Sorry, it's bigger than that. He is a success story that we're probably never going to see something like that again. The stuff he's gone through to get to where he is, and just that the fire of the human spirit, the endeavor to want more for yourself and for your loved ones. There's something in him. There's an innate special quality that puts him in a special bracket. That puts him in a bracket. This might be a crazy statement, but it puts him in the conversation in modern day terms. That puts him in the conversation with people like Ali. Yes, he's not on that level, but I mean in terms of that same type of. Do you get my point? There's a special quality. He's a good guy, well-spoken, humble. He's got every positive quality you could want. So that's someone you cheer for. That's a man you look at as a role model. That's someone you get behind. It's just a shame it's come so late. But he's so fit and everything that he could do this for the next 3 or 4 years, and rightfully so.
Good. As a heavyweight, they age late in both combat sports for a reason.
And he's fit, so it's good.
I mean, he's fast. He's a crazy, explosively athletic. He did certain things athletically, and I think Dewey Cooper gave a great interview with my colleague Luke Thomas on Morning Kombat that just came out. The amount of like things they did, perfect athletically, knowing he would have advantages over Fury in these little tiny categories to create sort of chaos and constant pressure on Fury. Like there was nothing accidental about this. But then again, like you can say that about everyone who's ever lost a huge fight when they were a big underdog. I'm sure they believed. I'm sure they had these game plans that we comically watched, become unglued. You know what I mean? Remember when Chris Algieri was going to fight Pacquiao on pay-per-view and they had this game plan of like staying in the cage for 4 rounds before you start late. I'm sure that idea sounded great on paper. What Francis did was like systematically break Fury down, and it just makes no sense. But it's also like, oh, it's easy for that guy because look at how jacked he is, whatever. No, he's just gone through more crazy challenging things in life than a lot of us. But I think the key to his success is he didn't look at these moments as sort of, I mean, we as people, we as humans can very easily cling to our losses in life too much and sort of, use them as excuses or use them as sort of defining moments of why we didn't pan out or whatever. And this man at every turn has taken all of these proposed L's and only use them to fuel him and build his resolve. And I mean, that's at the, as much as what he did seems so superhuman, that's like the basic fundamentals of positivity and in achieving your goals and dreams and going after it. It's an incredible reminder of that at the very least.
And like you said, it is emotionally moving. It is powerful, and it does that enduring of the human spirit. That type of thing that you think about. What have people been through to get to where they are and what they have to sacrifice. And Ngannou's done it all. He did everything to do that. So he's a hero in his own right. So hats off to him. And boxing has gained a superstar overnight.
You're right. You're right.
No, literally, and that wasn't expected, and that's the beauty of it. So hats off to Ngannou, and I'm sure we all look forward to seeing where he goes. And again, whether there's a rematch, there's so much for him to do now. So we look forward to seeing where he goes next. Brian, I'm just conscious of time. I've had you on for a long time. I just wanted to wrap it up with a few quick fire questions for you.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for all your time today. Quick fire questions. First, your top 3 pound for pound boxers in the sport today.
Okay, well, let's go with Terrence Crawford, number 1. That is just such a profoundly powerful step up performance from Crawford to a level that was just mesmerizing that that's the only thing. I mean, that was 4 days after Inoue moved up to a fourth weight division and dominated like one of the best, 12 best pound for pound guys in the world at that moment. So it almost needed to be a one-sided destruction, which it was. But what was the best about that for Crawford quickly is that he actually, people don't talk about this. Like Spence tried to win that fight even after he got knocked down early. He was walking him down with bombs, and Crawford's just taking it, walking through it, adjusting and hurting him. Wild. Number 3 is kind of crazy because Canelo did slip off, in my opinion. I allowed him to retain the number 1 pound for pound slot even after losing to Dmitry Bivol because I understood the gravity of what he was trying to do. But the subsequent follow-up performances against both Triple G and John Ryder, they were humanizing. They were like, okay, maybe this guy's starting to realize a ceiling in the second half of his prime. And then the way he came back against Jermell Charlo was just almost like, okay, maybe he's right. If he's healthy, if he's dialed in, there is nobody that can beat this version of him. I got to put him back at number 3. And I didn't think he'd get her. I thought this was going to begin the continuing Canelo slide, but he doesn't stop trying to fight the best in the world. He still wants this Bivol rematch that everybody's like, that's a bad idea. I'm going to keep him there at 3. After that, you do have a sort of a mix of names that could be mixed around, but you got to show a lot of respect to not just the 2 heavyweights, Fury and Usyk, for showing rare top 10 pound for pound level ability, but then also this can be different for everyone's pound for pound list, but which one of that next generation of guys are people ready? I have Devin Haney ranked very high coming off of that win over Lomachenko, even though a lot of people thought Loma won. I have him around number 5, but Shakur Stevenson, who I believe I have at 6 or 7, to me is the guy who will eventually out of this group be that number 1 pound for pound guy. And it's going to be really fun to see him continue to try to get there. And sort of, if they're like, I hate comparing people to Floyd because he was just so special, but I see a little Floyd and Haney. I see a lot of Floyd and Shakur, and I didn't think I'd be saying that right now. So we're in good hands pound for pound, but that's how I see the top 10 at the moment.
So that's Crawford, Inoue, and then Canelo.
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. And then last question. This one's more about yourself. Like you said, you've been involved in boxing from a young age, essentially due to family and sort of following the sport from a young age and films and whatnot, and just literally watching it whenever you can. You've then gone on to have a career in boxing. I asked Luke the same question, and Luke was very not dismissive. That's the wrong word to use. Not dismissive of the question, but he was very much, it's not about me. Like, but the question was, when it's all said and done for you, whenever your time comes in terms of retiring or leaving the sport of boxing, what would you like the legacy of Brian Campbell to be?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. I can understand Luke's response and almost not wanting to think about that. And I asked that question to, aging athletes in combat sports constantly. And sometimes you get an early idea of what they hope that people will say about them. Other times you get like, I can't talk about that until it's over. Yeah. But, obviously we think about that when we attain success and continue to build our brand or our profile or our star or whatever. To me, it's simple. I have a passion for this game, for this sport, for big fights, for the courage that it takes to go in that ring, for the inspiration that it takes to get up off the canvas, which is so relatable to life, that I try to share that joy, as I weaponize that joy as part of, what can I do to make myself an attractive prospect to viewers, to decision makers in terms of broadcasting. I take the responsibility seriously of my role in this. And by the way, it goes back to early in my journalism career when I was a high school football news reporter for newspapers, right out of high school and in my early college years. And I remember going to these big football games that meant so much for 2 towns, right? It meant so much for 2 communities of, let's say, whatever, 60,000 people, and thinking, you know what, there's about 1,000 people that came to this football game tonight. That means there could be tomorrow, 25,000 people that are going to care about this game that happened. But the only way that they're going to know about who won is getting that paper in the morning. And I remember thinking, I got a responsibility in the way I frame what happened and who did well and who, and that has carried me over into I started to get opportunities in boxing. I started to realize the role I could play. And I started to think, okay, what could I bring? What do I bring that's maybe different? I know enough about boxing X's and O's. I've done a little sparring. I could identify things, but that's not my calling. I certainly take serious my journalistic role. I love being a storyteller. That's part of a boxing broadcast. But what I'm trying to bring is joy, respect, energy, and to just try to basically say whatever is going to be shown from these incredible athletes, these brave warriors, these modern day warriors. I want to make people understand how important it is what they just did, right? You know what I mean? And I hope that people will look back and be like, as a guide, whether I listen to his podcast, whether I watch fights that he called, as a boxing guide, that guy made it more fun. And that's different than how other people look at it. I've looked at this as entertainment more than journalism or anything else from the beginning. And I think, I've been pleasantly surprised because I started this journalism job career back in the 90s, before Bill Simmons and Teddy Atlas having this personality on air that was just like weird. And like, I picked up different things from different people along the way, but I'm really happy that by the time I got to this level where I've quote unquote made it, we have things like the popularity of podcasts where you can, debate and have these opinions and almost play this grandiose acting role of whatever. But it's like, I'm not acting. I love this game. I love to bring it to whatever job you plug me into, whether I'm writing, hosting, calling a fight, working a podcast, whatever. I want to inject excitement into that and really honor what's really happening in there, which is a life or death contest for money. You know what I'm saying? So, I got knowledge of the game, but it's energy, it's love for this game. I don't know why I love this game so much. You know what I mean? I can give you long answers, but they might not really answer it, but it bit me. I didn't bite it, and I always say when I was at ESPN for 12 years and halfway through that career, there was a boss I respected that sat me down and he was like, "You've worked hard for us. I want to help you get to where you want to go. What are your dreams? Tell me what sport you want to work in. What do you want to be? An NFL blogger, an NBA writer? I can make a call upstairs and get you in a good thing." And I was like, "I don't know, man. I really want to be a boxing writer." And he was like, "You have 2 young kids. That's a horrible idea financially." He's like, "How many people in this do this job for a living full time?" And this was like 2011. I remember thinking Dan Raphael, Kevin Iole, and I guess half of Chris Mannix, right? And that might still be the case today, although Iole does more MMA, it seems, than he does boxing. It's not easy to sustain, retain, keep these roles to whatever. But I remember what I told the boss that day was, you can't pick what you love. And this thing has bit me, and I must walk it to its ending point. And for me, I come from a hometown that's not great, that people don't achieve and come out of there, that, I see a lot of bad things happen to great people. I've had my own personal setbacks. I've thought my career was over a couple of times on bad decisions I made, or a lack of motivation, or just the frustration we all feel of climbing the ladder and not being able to get to that next level. But whether it was necessity to feed my family or not, along the way, I built up some level of resolve that I'm just not going to take no for an answer, that if I'm going to get this second chance to find out how great I can be and try to inspire my kids and try to put a, safe roof over their head and food on the table, there's nothing that can stop me. So I do hope at the end of the day, people say, "Man, that guy loved the sport, but he dared to be great." Maybe it's not the same level of daring to be great as, somebody moving up 2 weight classes and fighting the best fighter in the world. But that guy tried, man. That guy gave everything he had to it. As long as anyone will say that and say, "Oh, and I laughed at a few of his cringe jokes," I'm good at the end of the day, because I struggle with everyone else of identity. What am I doing? What am I adding to the world? Okay. Besides my bank account, right? And sometimes I start to realize that sometimes people just want to get away from the natural realities of this world. And if I'm a smiling voice or a funny smirk that allows them to go, "Oh yeah, this is my guy. Let me take, 15 minutes and laugh and enjoy here," then again, I take that shit seriously. It matters to me. You know what I mean? That's the best thing I can do is give back in that regard and help other people. And, we're all in this together. I don't mean to go all Tony Robbins on you, Sherry, but we are all in this together at the end of the day. So, I'm blessed to be where I am, but as always, can't wait for the next big fight.
Brian, that was beautifully put. Thank you so much for that. That sort of ending portion of the interview, very beautifully put. And your passion and your love for the sport shines through not only when you've been on broadcast, but throughout this whole interview. You've been absolutely brilliant and a pleasure to have on. And I just want to say a big thank you for giving me your time, giving me a hell of a lot of time tonight. So I really do appreciate that. And that is, again, feeds back into what you said about passion and loving the sport. The fact that you can sit here for an hour and 50 minutes and give a guy you don't know time to talk about the sport, that says it all. So a massive thank you, Brian. And can you just let us know where we can find you on social media, please?
Yeah, thank you. At B Campbell on X/Twitter, at Brian C. Campbell on Instagram, if you want to check in on my updates and happenings. And watch me on Morning Kombat every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on YouTube, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Get it. Yes.
100%. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, bro.
Thank you.